Okay, well, good morning everybody in the UK, good afternoon everyone in China, and good day everyone in between. Welcome to this morning's China-Britain Business Council webinar on avoiding kinks in your supply chain in China. Delighted to have Michael Oates, the Operations Director at LNP China, who's based in Beijing, sitting there in Beijing this morning, so we'll connect with him in due course. Just to give a little bit of background on the China-Britain Business Council, for those who don't know who we are, the China-Britain Business Council helps British and Chinese businesses and organizations work together in China, the UK and third markets around the world. With 60 years of experience and experts in 11 offices and 15 Chinese locations, we operate alongside the British Chamber of Commerce in China to support companies of all sizes and sectors, whether they are new entrants or established operations, to realize the full potential of the fastest growing market in the world. Our unrivaled network of 130 staff across 26 locations understands the sectoral, geographical and cultural aspects of business success in China. This personal expertise is complemented by a range of CBBC events, research and consultative services tailored to meet the specific requirements of companies. As the partner of choice for British companies working in China, our diverse 1,000-strong membership includes some of the UK's largest and most established companies, some of the UK's most dynamic and innovative SMEs, as well as leading Chinese companies. We also promote the UK as the best place for Chinese companies to invest and do business. We cooperate closely with the Department of International Trade, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and across government to highlight export opportunities for UK companies and investment opportunities for Chinese organizations. As an independent organization, CBBC offers trusted, impartial advice while maintaining close partnerships with the UK and Chinese governments. So that's just a little bit of background on ourselves. Okay, so moving swiftly along, this is an interactive session this morning, so if you want to ask questions, please do type in your question here. Your question will then appear on my screen. If it's pertinent to the presentation at the time, I'll drop it in as we go along. If not, I'll save it to the Q&A session at the end. If I could ask everybody, please, just to make sure that I'm not talking out there into the ether, if you could click on this little button here, that is the raise your hand. So I'm just highlighting a button. If you could just click on that, and that will just make sure that I'm not talking out into the ether there to nobody. Ah, yes, I can see some hands going up. Fantastic. All right, thank you very much. I'm going to put everybody else's hands down. Thanks for that. And we'll just move along with the presentation. Before I do, I just want to give a background for Michael, and indeed he'll talk a little bit more about LNP China, who are well known to us and excellent members here at the China-Britain Business Council. So Michael, based in Beijing, he oversees the management and growth of their client business in China. With a degree in Chinese from Oxford University, Michael has now lived and worked in China for over 10 years, developing his extensive skills in business operations and generating sales in China. He previously spent 5 years specializing in the booming food and beverage industry in China. As well as starting his own business, Michael was previously head of the San Pellegrino brand in China. So very well positioned to talk to you about accessing the China market and indeed distribution, supply chains, all of those sorts of things. So now comes the little moment of truth where I hope that Michael is still out there. Michael, are you out there?
Yes, I am. I'm in Beijing.
Fantastic. Over to you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for that kind of introduction. Just allow me 2 minutes to add to it. So my name is Michael. As the bio suggests, yes, I graduated with a degree in Chinese from Oxford in, when was it? About 2011 now. And even though my first arrival in China was 2006, I've been here since 2011, working previously at China's largest importer and distributor of fine wines, ASC, which is part of the Suntory Group. And latterly, I moved up to be the brand director of San Pellegrino, so working with Nestle. So basically, as part of my job for Pellegrino, I had the experience of not only importing about 7 odd million bottles of sparkling water per year from Italy into China, but also handling the China side distribution. Give an idea of where 7 million bottles went. Most of them were consumed in Shanghai and East China. We did have clients as far away as Tibet, Yunnan, which is on the border of Vietnam, or up towards the stands in places like Xinjiang. So our supply chain had to be fairly flawless. I oversee our full range of product delivery services to reasonably useful insight. Can we turn the page, please?
Sorry, Michael, I just had a bit of a wobble with the system there. Hopefully it's okay now. I've
Oh,
changed the slide.
yeah,
One of those Houston, we have a problem moments, but hopefully Houston, we don't have a problem anymore.
that's all right. This is every system has kinks, and this is this is part of managing them. Fantastic. So yeah, supply chain. Why does it matter? Fundamentally, supply chain is a fairly thankless task because people only notice it when it goes horribly wrong. And the real issue here is twofold. Firstly, China is a huge, diverse and growing market. And brand owners, they want to access Chinese consumers, they want to build their brands, they want to generate sales. But a sale isn't complete until the cash is collected and the goods are in the consumer's hand. So that makes supply chain invaluable. And getting it right will do a huge amount to build the credibility of your brand in the eyes of not only business clients, but also end consumers. Secondly, it matters as a foreign company because there are a vast number of domestic companies in China, many of whom will probably operate as competitors to yourselves, who do get it right, and they get it right consistently. So really best practice is very well established, and consumers, whether it's in a business level or on an individual level, really do expect the best. And that's why it's important to have the best planning and the best execution. Slide, please. So what does supply chain look like when it's done right? To give you an anecdote, LMP began working with one of the UK's leading suppliers of agricultural machinery equipment, such as polytunnels, and also soft fruit about 6 months ago. We sat down with them for a day and a half to really build all the structures, and then they plugged us into their logistics team directly, so we could work from very much the goods pickup level in the UK through to freight forwarding, arrival in China, clearance, and last mile logistics. And without them having a single full-time member of staff in China, they generated overselling. And now that business is growing at, conservatively, we're looking at 300 to 400% growth. And that's through repeat orders from China clients who are incredibly happy with their service, as well as with the fundamental quality of their goods. So yeah, when it's very, very nice. Conversely, slide please. Conversely, when it goes wrong, it's a real spoke in the wheels and everything grinds to a halt. What I mean by this is back in my beverage days, I knew a couple of companies who were really looking to take advantage of the boom in craft spirits, gins, rums, brandies, etc. in East China. And where people drink spirits, they also drink mixers. And Fever-Tree was one of the leading brands at the time, something that Chinese consumers really wanted. They drank it in Hong Kong, they drank it in New York and London, and they wanted it at home now. So a couple of enterprising chaps, they shipped, I think it was 3 or 4 40-foot containers across to Shanghai. They did some of the initial registration, and then it came to the moment of truth, the customs clearance. The bill of lading was correct, the invoice was correct, the sales contract was signed, and then it came to the point where they had to submit their chemical analysis report, something mandatory for all types of food coming into China, and they found out the quinine content of the tonic too high. And that pushed Fever-Tree tonic water from being a refreshing mixer for your gin into being a Chinese traditional herbal remedy, which needed clearance and testing and approval by the Chinese equivalent of the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. Now, securing this approval has only been achieved by about 300 products worldwide. It takes about 2 years, and the investment of a minimum of 500,000 RMB, or about 55,000 sterling in today's money. It turned out actually the entire value of the tonic water, which was gradually getting warm on a dock somewhere and incurring hundreds of pounds of storage fees per day in customs. The poor guys who tried to import it in the first place had to just write the whole thing off as a loss and go away to lick their wounds and rebuild their bank balances. So yeah, this is, I don't want to scare you too much with cautionary tales and horror stories, but when supply chain goes wrong, supply even the most far-flung of Chinese cities. Now, whilst that's very good at creating jobs, etc., it also is a real boon for supply chain. And a lot of Chinese independent logistics companies, you may have heard of them, Xinfeng, etc., are really taking advantage of this to build supply chains and logistics services which are secure, transparent, efficient, and responsive. And what I mean by this is, if I were to buy a product, I'm in Beijing, if I were to purchase a product online in Shanghai, within about an hour I would receive a logistics tracking number, like a FedEx number, and that would allow me to track my parcel almost to the street where it's at, where the individual courier is walking. And as a resident of Beijing, about 1,500 miles away, I would expect my parcel to arrive by 9 AM tomorrow, or there would be someone on the end of a phone or on my phone or on an app who would be able to answer my questions as to where it was within about 2 minutes. Customer service is 24/7, and unless you're able to compete, consumers are not. Yeah, so basically the purpose of today's talk is to give a brief idea and a brief overview of the various ways we can bring goods into China and how to really optimize those pathways in order to satisfy the needs of your consumers at whatever stage of market entry or brand building you are. Slide, please. So at the very initial start, we're going to run you through 3 main types of China supply chain, which you will probably come across at various stages of your market entry proceedings. Slide, please. Oh, I think it also, at this stage, we will be able to have a...
That's right, Michael. I think we're doing a quick poll at this point, aren't we? So let me drop the poll in. I am here. I don't quite know where we're having a couple of technical difficulties, but bear with us. Thanks for your patience. So I'm going to drop a poll in. So Michael is going to ask you basically, where are you at? And it's just for Michael to have an understanding of where you are currently in that sort of exporting and supply chain world. So if you could just click on your answer or what you think most represents you, and we'll just give it a few seconds. I can see, yeah, excellent. Some of you are already clicking on that. So it's finding solutions to import your product, selling via cross-border e-commerce, company-to-company wholesale deals, or other. That other, I guess, might even be a mixture of all of those things. As I said when we were going along, if you have any questions as we go, please do type them in, and I'll drop them in and ask Michael as we go along. So just give it another couple of seconds. Almost all of you, and incredibly, right, I'll just, that's pretty much everybody. I'm going to close that and I'll share the results with everybody. The useful answer of other has won, which I'm assuming is going to be a mixture of, the 3. But
we're going to have some exciting questions, I imagine, about other. This is going to be a nice test for me. But it's also good to see a third of people, roughly, on the B2B side. Interestingly, a very limited response in favor of cross-border e-commerce, which I wasn't expecting. But yeah, I think this is a good selection of answers, and I hope everyone takes some interesting insights and pieces of information away today.
Super, thanks. I'll drop back to your slide now.
Thank you so much. Yes, as we mentioned, there are basically 3 key types of supply chain, 3 unique different sets of bottlenecks or pain points we're going to come across. And I'm going to deal with each one in turn. I believe 80% of the listeners today, or people joining us, are the market exploration stage. That means there are no deals. It's more about the market, building products that are bringing samples in. And then the next stage, something that has become very, very popular over the last 5 years, is what's called e-export, or some people might know it as cross-border e-commerce, which is fulfilling a deal on an overseas website and then sending in its to final Chinese consumer through one of two different methods, either as a customer effect or through government-sanctioned cross-border e-commerce import tax. And then finally, there's the classic B2B trade model of shipping containers into a seaport or an airport, clearing them, labeling them, duty and VAT paid according to HS code, and then selling it on to your final Chinese distributor who then break it down and wholesale it. So it's very, very standard, and that's something that I'm sure most brands have experience of throughout the world. Slide, please. And just to kick off, we'll have a little look into 3 ways of bringing goods in for your pre-market exploration activity. Next slide, please. So let's say you secured a booth at food and beverage trade fairs in Shanghai or SIAL or ProWine or one of these major events to introduce your brand to potential Chinese individual and also corporate clients. So there are 3 ways to bring samples into China. So the first way is to actually send it in as a sample. This has to be, basically you declare it as a personal effect, and then you would send it in through FedEx or TNT or an international and have it delivered to the exhibition location. A very, very small amount of tax would be payable, and also you would have to maintain the value of the shipment as under 1,000 RMB or 110 pounds. LMP, I think about 2 years ago, we were called up by a very desperate Cornish pasty merchant who had shipped 300 pounds worth of Cornwall's finest baked goods into Shanghai, only to find that Chinese customs, they saw that there's no way on earth so 50 kilos of pasties was ever going to be less than 110 pounds, and so impounded them. And this guy was frantically calling everyone he knew, trying to find a company who was capable of getting his pasties out of customs before they melted. So customs will be strict about this, and our recommendation is, based on experience, that you want to declare a value of below 1,000 RMB, and you also want to severely limit the number of each SKU you send in, just to avoid having your goods impounded or destroyed. Now, secondly, we have carnets, which are basically a method of importing a product for use at a trade fair and then being able to re-export it once that product has been used. Whilst this is quite simple, other places in the world, China customs will actually demand to see evidence that the product was used at a trade show before allowing the re-exportation of the good. So, for example, you bring in, I don't know, an iPad or what else, a piece of machinery to demonstrate at a trade fair. You're going to have to produce a video or a written declaration by the hosts of that fair to justify the re-export. Otherwise, China customs is going to kick up a huge amount of fuss, and they may not even allow you to re-export the product. So how to kind of cut through all the red tape? Most people, and this is slightly dubious, but
Michael, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but I can't hear you, so I'm just taking a punt on the slide changes here. Apologies for this. I'm not sure if it's the Beijing end or the UK end.
Export is designed is, as I mentioned, to connect foreign brands directly to the Chinese consumer and allow the end consumer in China access to preferential rates of import, VAT and duty. It's a way of connecting the Chinese consumer to the outside world in a cost-effective way. And it allows the Chinese individual consumer to act as the importer of record for goods, which means that instead of having to go through a clearance agent or to go through a distributor, customs will call up the consumer directly and confirm paperwork, have duty paid, etc. before the goods go in. Next slide, please.
I'm back again, Michael. I can hear you. I don't quite know what's happening, but I have changed the slide.
Never a dull moment.
Indeed. Well, this is to demonstrate the pressurized situation that supply chain and kinks in your supply chain can have as well, I think. I hope everyone's living my pain at the moment.
Well, I hope it's not too painful here. So yeah, as I mentioned, the website, you can either export from websites. So this is a very good example. It's Selfridge. So Chinese consumers will log onto the Selfridge's website. They will submit a full shopping cart of goods as per usual, as any other consumer would do in the UK or America. And then they would pay with either an international credit card or one of the increasingly liberalized Chinese payment platforms, which connect Chinese domestic consumers with domestic payment methods, such as UnionPay, Alipay, or WeChat Pay. They would be actually allowed to pay in foreign currency with those directly into Selfridge's overseas bank accounts. Then Selfridges would take whichever products they chose to purchase and send them in to the final consumer through what's called the personal effects channel. Next slide, please. Fantastic. So the personal effect, or the proprietary website solution, is actually very, very effective if you have a well-established brand name in China. Selfridges is well known, people know to search for their websites, and they get a lot of traffic from China. Now, alternatively, you could list your product on one of the many cross-border e-commerce platforms, which is basically serves as online shopping malls, a little bit like Amazon in the UK. And these websites are often international spin-offs of very, very successful Chinese domestic e-commerce sites like Tmall or JD.com. And it works in a very similar way. The client will log on, they will pay to an international bank account, which is probably controlled by the platform, and then goods will be dispatched from overseas, either to be sent into the end consumer via personal effects or the cross-border e-commerce clearance platform, clearance channel. Slide, please. So this is a rather confusing slide, one that kind of a little bit of explanation. Now, on the right, at the bottom, there's one column called domestic e-commerce site and a row for traditional import or traditional trade. Now that's more your B2B based commerce, so I'm not going to deal with it right now. What I'm going to talk about a little bit overseas website or your overseas platform. So there are two ways into China for cross-border e-commerce goods or e-export goods. Firstly, there is personal effect. That is typically used by low value or small quantity items because actually the value for personal effects to enjoy preferential tax rates is capped at 1,000 RMB if you have more than one item in a single package, or if you're only sending individual items like Selfridges, actually the preferential tax rate is uncapped. But typically that's used for lower value items. Now, secondly, there is the government-approved cross-border e-commerce channel. The way that cross-border e-commerce channel actually developed is by the government giving it access to preferential rates of duty and VAT. So a lot of the time you'll find that goods imported through the cross-border e-commerce channel enjoy lower VAT and lower duties than the equivalent items if sent through personal effects. And this is the way for the government to incentivize overseas merchants to use this channel. There are a few limitations, as with all things. So for example, cross-border e-commerce, you can only fulfill parcels with a hard capped value of less than 2,000 RMB, so about 280 US dollars or 220 pounds. Secondly, each consumer in China can only purchase 20,000 RMB, about 2,500 pounds, through this channel per year, so it is limited. Also, the port of entry for cross-border e-commerce, not every courier has cross-border e-commerce clearance channels in every port in China, whereas your FedExes, your TNTs, your DHLs will be able to clear personal effects through every port. So before going through this channel, I would check very carefully with your partner, or be it for logistics or be it for sales, to make sure you're actually trying to send the goods through a port which can clear them. Alternatively, you could find a trusted local agent or consultant who would very happily do the research for you, I'm sure. Slide, please. Yeah, so this is where a third of you really start to get a bit interested. And this is the traditional B2B method. You find a distributor, they want to buy the goods, consumers are excited, you're going to break down the goods and sell them through your sub-distribution channels. Everyone's a winner. This is how I did my San Pellegrino. However, there are a few idiosyncrasies to the Chinese clearance system that can and do often trip up new entrants into the market. Slide, please. So, when done right, such as by Haygrove, again, things move very quickly. You end up with happy customers, and you end up with being happy yourself as a supplier, because you're working with guys on the ground with experience, who are responsive, who know the local situation, and can also have the resources and relationships to solve any small problems which come up along the way. I really do suggest that if you haven't imported into China before and you're not working with a purchaser who have their own import facilities, work with a middleman, choose your middleman carefully, and make sure that you have local support, because there will be issues. Next slide, please. So yeah, one of the idiosyncrasies of the Chinese import system is the way it restricts certain goods. I mean, it comes as no surprise to anyone that things like health supplements or chemicals or currency are going to be quite heavily restricted. But it's the restrictions of things like food and beverage which really do trip people up. Can we have the next slide, please? So here's a very good example of a food and drink brand who had a great deal lined up with a major Chinese retailer, Metro, and they were just looking to fulfill. So as part of the fulfillment for food and beverage, you have to produce a China-compliant back label with translated ingredients and also a breakdown of all the energy components into the drink. So to give you a brief example, there are certain elements of the chemical makeup of a product which have to be put in bold. They're called 5 key elements. That includes things like sodium, carbohydrate, etc., and sugars. If you don't have these in bold on a label, Chinese customs doesn't want to know. Until you've produced things which satisfy their checklists for compliance, there is no bend in this system. And unfortunately, this British company, they got so excited that there was not enough oversight on their labeling, and these products ended up in China customs for about 3 weeks while compliant labels were designed, printed, and then hand stock on 125,000 cans. Obviously, the final retailer was not happy to receive goods which were not really that prettily labeled, in broken packaging, and 2.5 weeks late. And so the actual supplier in the UK had to take a haircut of about 40% on that invoice price, purely to salvage what was left of the deal and get some money out of it. I understand that occasionally designing labels and translating MSDSs and so forth can be frustrating, and it can seem like very small details to really fret about, but the devil is in the details when it comes to China's supply chain, and they're things which it doesn't pay to guess about, and a little bit of sloppiness will lead to a major headache down the road. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I mentioned a little bit earlier that it really is important to know your partner, whether that's an import agent, whether it's a full-service company like LMP, or whether your importing partner is going to be actually the end distributor, because sometimes distributors will have their own import arms. When I say an importer has to have the correct business scope on their Chinese business license, what does that mean? I guess the way Chinese companies are set up is a little bit different from their equivalents in the West. For example, I believe a limited company or an LLC in America, you can basically do a very, very wide range of businesses. Anything that makes money, you're allowed to do as long as it's legal. Now, for Chinese companies, when you set up a company, you have to declare very narrowly what you're going to do. So, for example, LMP, we have a very, very long list of things which we're allowed to do, listed in great detail and printed on our actual business license. So, for example, we can do financial consultancy, we can do supply chain consultancy, we can do cross-border trade, and then in an open bracket, we have a whole list of products we can import, and then a whole list of products we need special permits to import. If in doubt, ask, and if you're not 100% satisfied, get a copy of the physical business license and double check, because the worst thing in the world is to send in a load of products and you've already paid CIF, and then they're sitting on a dock because there is some issue with your purchaser's paperwork. Containers of wine and containers of other products get stranded in ports, and you've lost all, when the goods are in China, you've lost all leverage, or almost all leverage. So it really pays to get your ducks in a row, first of all. Import license, also, you need to have very narrowly defined scopes of business on your import license, things like machinery, things like alcohol, food products. These things have to be listed out by name. You don't automatically have the right to import goods when you have a China business license. You have to apply for it separately to a different bureau. So again, when you do a deal with a Chinese partner, it's not a question of trust, it's a matter of course. Ask for all their paperwork and double check it. I know some guys who've even asked for notarized copies to ensure the authenticity. Your Chinese business partner is going to take this as a matter of course. It's not an affront, it's not a sign of mistrust. It's what people do in China, and you should do no different. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up to be made a bit of a mug of. And finally, if you have a distributor who's planning to sell your products, they also need to have the right licenses and permits to sell it on to third parties once it's cleared customs. Food and drink, you have to have a food and drink circulation permit. Likewise for alcohol, likewise for certain restricted types of machinery. Again, and I'm going to sound incredibly boring, make sure you've seen all this paperwork before you sign a contract, and absolutely before any goods get put on a boat. Next slide, please. Yes, so for standard unrestricted categories, there are 3 key pieces of paperwork that your freight forwarder or import partner will need to provide to customs. Firstly, it's a bill of lading, so that's a very standard document as prepared by your shipping partner, a packing list, and a commercial invoice, signifying that a party in China, a China-registered company, has purchased your products and therefore has the right to import it. Without any of these items, you don't have a chance of clearing customs. No matter if your import agent is the head of customs son-in-law, it's not going to happen. And you also, something that we've experienced in the past is if there's any sort of blank space, any sort of inability to reconcile all the company's names on bills of ladings, packing lists, and commercial invoices, customs will start asking questions. And they take time to do this. And unfortunately, in the supply chain industry, time is something we do not have because it means more fixed storage cost and it means missed deadlines. And both of those things are going to hurt your bottom line. So it's always best to have an experienced Chinese import partner review your documents before goods arrive in port and sign them off. Make sure all the names are spelled correctly. Make sure the full names of the companies are spelled correctly. For example, we almost had a delay with a load of goods that came into China because the partner in the UK, our client, they wrote LMP China on the documents. Now, everyone knows LMP China is what we call ourselves. However, the full formal name of LMP China is LMP Beijing Trading and Commercial Limited Company. And unless they had that name spelled correctly, no blank spaces on the documents, no lines missing, gross and net weight all matching, unless all the T's were crossed and the I's were dotted, there were going to be delays and there would have to be explanations sent back. Fantastic. So I hope that was a very reasonably interesting and valuable overview of a few ways to get your goods from the country of origin into the hands of end consumers. And so now we're just going to move on to a very quick final section of things which I wish I'd known when I started out in this industry. To be honest, everyone at LMP, from the top to the bottom, has made mistakes, and we've learned from those mistakes, and kind of the whole point of our company is to make sure we can help our partners build an SOP so that you don't repeat those errors and you get it right the first time. So here are 5 brief secrets of getting your supply chain right the first time. Firstly, choose the right location for your import and warehousing. I mean, this is This is fairly fundamental stuff. And in the UK or in America, it would be a very simple choice. Where is your consumer? Get it into the closest port to the consumer and save on trucking costs. And broadly speaking, this is similar in China. You've got a client in North China, you'd probably be looking to ship into Tianjin, which is the major container port next to Beijing. Now, for the most part, that would hold true. But if you were importing chemicals, you would really want to avoid Tianjin. And the reason for that is 2 or 3 years ago, there was a huge chemical explosion at a dockside warehouse, which obliterated a couple of square blocks. And ever since then, customs has been very wary of touching anything remotely chemical or remotely hazardous. So actually, when we work with partners who transport a mixture of hazardous and non-hazardous chemicals into China for North China end consumers, we bring the non-hazardous material through Tianjin, about 50 or 60 miles away from the final delivery site, and then we ship the hazardous materials through Shanghai, which is about 1,500 miles to the south, but a little bit more liberal with their import restrictions. And that's really the only way we can do it, by going to a port 1,500 miles further from the end consumer. We not only save time, because clearance is much faster in Shanghai, but even with the added costs of internal trucking, we save money. So the obvious answer is not always the right answer for where should I import. And again, something that I experienced to my cost with Pellegrino is climate is a massive factor. As you see, there's Harbin in the north, which is basically Russia or kind of North Korea, right down to Guangzhou, which you're getting a climate not dissimilar from Vietnam or Singapore. Now, one of my major markets for San Pellegrino was, again, it was North China. A lot of guys in Beijing and surrounds, they not only had the money, but they had the appreciation of that kind of lifestyle to drink imported Italian mineral water, which is great. And in order to service that market, I said, well, look, guys, you know, we're going to ship into Shanghai, and then we're going to split off a third of our imports and ship them into Tianjin. It's going to be great. We're going to save a ton on trucking. Water is heavy. Glass is heavy. We need to cut down fixed cost. So far, so good, until November rolls around. And temperatures in Beijing start to fall. And they fall down to about -11, at which point all the San Pellegrino in our warehouse in Harbin, in Tianjin, freezes. And when water freezes, it expands. Plastic bottles are okay. Unfortunately, fancy Pellegrino in green glass bottles explodes. And there's nothing quite as soul-destroying as going into a warehouse with 1 million exploded bottles of water to teach you that climate matters, China's the size of a continent, and it's always best to think carefully before making a decision, and also try and talk to guys on the ground with experience before deciding on your port of entry. Next slide. Yeah, another secret is use free trade zones judiciously. Again, I'm going to make myself sound quite silly, but again, this is a mistake a former company of mine made. Free trade zones sound fantastic, duty-free, basically a bonded piece of land. We thought it was ASC Fine Wines, fantastic opportunity. We shipped probably the best part of 10 million litres of wine into China. Why not store them all in a free trade zone and then release to order? It sounds fantastic. Cash flow is going to be a lot smoother. Until you realize, actually, that free trade zone storage is about twice the price of storage in a cleared zone. And also, the process of bringing goods in and out is quite complex. When you bring product into a free trade zone, you still have to go through the same customs through pre-clearance, and that has to be checked. It will take 1 to 2 weeks for most products to go through that process. The difference is you don't pay duty and VAT immediately. You pay it when the goods leave. So actually, because you do this pre-clearance and then you do a final clearance, the volume of paperwork and related processing fees doubles. And this was a nightmare because every day we were trying to service 500, 700 clients in the Shanghai region from Shanghai Waigaoqiao Free Trade Zone. And so we basically made a traffic jam of trucks every day coming out of this free trade zone, submitting documents in triplicate, quadruplicate, if that's even a word. And this added, whilst our clients were maybe 30 miles away, they were getting their goods 36 hours later because paperwork was such a nightmare. And so we moved all our warehousing from cleared to free trade zone back to cleared within about 18 months. It was a nightmare. Where free trade zones are really useful is for getting goods in and out of China and using China basically as an APAC logistics hub. We're working with a very big FMCG brand currently who have a major market in China, but are also looking to develop markets in Southeast Asia as well as Korea and Japan. They've chosen to use Shanghai Free Trade Zone as a logistics hub, so they will ship all of APAC's products into there. And then, based on need, they will remove them, send them on to their final market. Or, if there's a particular SKU that's needed in China, they will clear it. So this is where it can be really useful to increase your responsiveness and reduce lead time for fulfilling orders in the general Asian market, or for storing safety stock for China. But it is not a single cure-all for cash flow and delaying VAT and duty payments. And then finally, there is one type of free trade zone which is very good for regular goods. But actually, while a free trade zone is a bonded zone, there is a separate cross-border e-commerce free trade zone. So when designing a cross-border e-commerce supply chain, you've got to be aware of that. You've got to be aware of shipping goods into Shanghai Free Trade Zone doesn't make it eligible to be sent out for cross-border e-commerce. It has to be internally transferred with the payment of handling fees, logistics fees, warehouse in and out fees, before it becomes eligible for sale through a cross-border e-commerce platform. So yeah, whilst free trade zones sound fantastic, free trade and free trade zones are not always free. Next slide, please. Something we cannot overstate is the importance of a customs clearance agent or partner. As I mentioned, with the best will in the world and the best planning in the world, it occasionally happens that things will go wrong. Or customs will knock off early one day and they will not clear goods which you desperately need the following morning. And this is where a customs clearance agent comes into their own, and these guys can be worth their weight in gold. Guys who have experience clearing any product, be it machinery, be it chemicals, be it food and beverage, they will understand how to fill out paper. They will have the right relationships within customs to expedite proceedings. And really, LMP invests a huge amount of our time and our resources in finding and maintaining relationships. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they decided they were knocking off and not doing anything else, despite our products being next in line for clearance and release. The brand owner goes absolutely potty because they'd invested 10 and a bit thousand pounds in their booth, and they were going to have this whole dog and pony show with nothing to give the clients. So at LMP, we phone up our agent. He says, "Don't worry about it. We'll sort it out. We'll get you 10 cases." And what he seems to have done is snuck into customs, distracted the guys who are doing clearance, stuck 10 cases on the back of a truck and drove off with it. This is the value of a good clearance agent. They will go the extra mile to make sure your business functions smoothly, and they need to be on the ground. These things cannot happen from an office in London or from New York or even from Singapore. You need boots on the ground and experience. Next slide. Yeah, so a very good to make is understanding China's rhythm of business. And what I mean by this is culturally, and this is going to sound like a very obvious point, but culturally China is not like the West. They have different holidays and they have different shopping events. The oranges and the red envelopes known as hongbao, they signify Chinese New Year, which is basically 3 weeks between the end of January and the middle of February when nothing happens. Everyone's on holiday, everyone's with their family, giving out these red envelopes full of money, eating family meals, going back to their hometowns, potentially thousands of miles away from their place of work, and nothing happens. If you have goods that have been imported the day before Chinese New Year, they're not going to be processed for clearance until the week after, or 2 weeks after at some stage. So you're going to have to eat at least 3 weeks of extra port storage fees. This is why you really need to understand when the market's going to slow down, such as for clearance over Chinese New Year, and conversely, when the market's going to speed up. And these two pictures on the right of your screen are two of the major shopping days in China. Firstly, 3/21, so that's the 21st of March. And something you might have heard of below is Double 11, which is the world's biggest single online consumer event. This is Black Friday times 15 in China. And if you don't have enough stock cleared and shipped in time, you're going to be running out of stock. And as any brand owner knows, no stock equals no money. And that's a real pain. And this is why businesses with experience of China markets are going to be pushing as hard as they can to get containers on ships by August, so goods can be cleared and in place for these major shopping events like the 11th of November. Next slide, please. And then finally, when you're managing your end consumer, be it B2C, so business to consumer, or B2B, business to business, you need to have a local voice. Guys operating on the same time zone as your end consumer are really going to be invaluable in answering questions about local market conditions, contacting logistics providers, contacting customs clearance agents, and getting the right answers as soon as possible. You will find that Chinese local customers will ask you questions that you, as a Western business owner or Western business representative, will not be able to answer. And they will not be satisfied by guys saying, well, let me ask someone in your time zone and then tell you the following day. They want answers immediately because that's what they expect. So finding the right customer service support who's available almost 24/7 and is able to contact your various other vendors from logistics, customs clearance, storage, etc. in real time, that's really going to add to your final consumer's sense of safety around purchasing your goods and dealing with you. It's something that you don't necessarily need to hire full-time boots on the ground, but it's something you really need to have in your armory in order to compete with aggressive, well-resourced local brands. And I believe that takes us to the end of this brief presentation.
Hey, Michael.
Yeah, so everything.
Well done. It was a pretty monumental speech there. Thank you very much for that. You kept going for a good while I dropped in and out of the tech. Sorry I couldn't drop questions and things in as we went along. I was desperately scrambling around trying to make the thing work. But we got there in the end. But thanks for that. I was going to move on. I mean, maybe you want to give a very brief, these slides here, just exactly who you guys are. I mean, we're coming up to the hour, so I do want to get to the Q&A as well. But maybe you just want to put a bit of context on what you do.
Yeah, so sure. LMP China, in a nutshell, we understand that brand owners and marketers are passionate about proselytizing for their brands. They're not necessarily passionate about supply chain, compliance, payment solutions, all the things that make a business run but aren't necessarily interesting or sexy. So therefore, we kind of designed the SOP for our partners to operate smoothly, compliantly and successfully in China, and we take care of all of that while you guys focus on what it is you do best, which is building your brands. That in a nutshell is LMP.
All right, thank you. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess you've got quite a lot of clients that we're looking at here with whom you work, and that are doing a great job at that.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
All
Yeah,
right.
no, we've just ticked over £35 million of trade facilitated between the UK and China, and this is our 10th year, so we've been around for a while.
Terrific. All right, well, let's move on. You have offices in the UK and China. I'm sure people get in touch. I just wanted to see if anybody has any questions. I do have one from John Luke, and it was actually going back to the e-commerce, I think, when it was about cross-border e-commerce and labeling. And he was sorry, Jean-Paul. He says, if you import through JD, for example, on British products, do you still need the Chinese labeling?
Are we talking about cross-border JD or domestic JD.com?
Well,
Because
maybe,
if you're going through
yeah,
cross-border
keep the answer to
e-commerce,
both.
such as, all right, both, wow. So if you're going through Dingdong Worldwide, that's a fundamentally, it's 100% cross-border e-commerce. So you don't need labels for that. If you're going through domestic Jingdong, the goods will have to be cleared through China Customs in the traditional B2B manner, and therefore they will require China compliant labeling, yes.
Okay, thanks for that. I've got a question from Mary. It says, how do I get local customer service if I have no presence on the ground in China?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually, it's something that LMP has thought about quite carefully because we've had this question a lot from our clients. And what we do is we have a team in China who will operate as customer service for our various partners. And so we'll be in charge of supply chain management, customer relations, answering all those local questions which are going to be asked at odd hours of the night for UK or Europe, and giving the benefit of our local expertise and local follow-up with vendors. You don't have to employ us full-time, but you can employ third parties to operate on your behalf.
All right, well, thank you for that. One more here from John. I quite like this one. He says, your description of customs clearance agent sounds quite dodgy. Is that the right thing to do?
Yes, so as with a lot of things in China, there is the compliant way to do things, and then there is the way that is effective. And so I guess the anecdote I was telling was this particular clearance agent is by the book. They will do everything in their power to clear your goods in a timely fashion and in a compliant way. However, I was kind of seeking to just to describe in a real pinch, if you're in a complete jam and there's nothing else that you can do, there are some guys who you can work with who will say, sorry, can't be done. And there are some guys who won't take no for an answer and will get you the results you need when you need them. And they won't always do that through the most compliant of ways, but they will make sure that your goods are where they need to be when they need to be. And in our experience, this is where real value for our partners is created.
Okay, a deliciously diplomatic answer there, Michael. I mean, I would, certainly from the China-Britain Business Council's perspective, we would urge caution when you feel uncomfortable doing business in a way that you would do it in the UK. Just talk to peers and talk to people like Michael and talk to organisations like our own that can support, just to make sure that you don't find yourself going down any rabbit holes that you don't want to. That's pretty much it, I think. As I say, we're up to the hour in the questions. Up to the hour in the session. We've had a few questions. I wanted to say thank you very much to Michael for his incredibly comprehensive overview of how you get your stuff into China. One of the important things, and I think an important target for government and for us at the China Britain Business Council, is to encourage more UK companies to export to China. There's a huge opportunity, a huge thirst for British products. Be they FMCG type products, retail products. Brand Britain is very strong. So China can come across as big and awkward and intimidating, but talking to people like Michael and LNP and to organizations like ours, you can bust some of those myths. You have to do your homework. You have to do your background, your research, and understand how to go about it. But it certainly is a thriving, fascinating, and brilliant market if you get it right. So that's pretty much it, I think, for today. All I want to do is just draw your attention to a couple of upcoming things. On the 15th of March, we have a couple of, and the 31st of March, 2 more webinars, if webinars are your thing. One, gaining a lower cost presence in China, how SMEs are engaging to win, and then one at the end of March on integrity due diligence, identifying risk issues when investing in new business relationships. You should be able to click on those links. If not, please just go to our website or follow up with me afterwards. And finally, on the 28th of March in London is our national conference. This will cover a vast range of China-related topics, from healthcare to retail to e-commerce to practical first steps for companies new to market. So hopefully we'll cover something for everybody on that day, and you can find it at www.chinabusinessconference.org. So other than that, I just wanted to say thank you very much to everybody for participating today. Please excuse the technical issues that we had. I hope it didn't interfere with your experience too much. And most importantly, thank you very much to Michael in Beijing for your time and for your expertise. Have a great evening. So thanks very much, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.